There's some preachers, man, in cities you better not say nothing about. You be beat to death. That's a game they play. And Americans are good at it. They say one thing and do something else. And all that old spooky hoodoo stuff that used to work, it don't work now. The whole vibration change. And television has an effect.
I'd like to talk a little about the recent and not so recent rash of white authority in this country, abusing their powers in order to hunt, beat, and murder black men, and even black women, with impunity. The list of black men who've been profiled, abused, unjustly imprisoned, murdered, framed, etc. is too extensive to include in this video. But what I wanted to explain is where the mindset within white men in authority who abuse black men actually originated. We have to go back to chattel slavery just for a minute to fully understand what's taking place today. Think of American slavery as an earthquake and black people as a group that continue to feel the aftershocks of that earthquake. Black life, as a result of the quake of enslavement, is now existing on a fault line, which naturally makes them more susceptible to further quakes and tremors. Now let's look at something called precepts of American slavery jurisprudence. What are precepts? Precepts are principles or general rules that regulate thoughts, behaviors, and attitudes of certain individuals or groups. Precepts are unlike laws, which are put into place by cities, counties, states, etc., that if broken carry certain penalties. Precepts, on the other hand, carry no penalties or legal consequences if broken. The most fundamental precept during chattel slavery was that God divinely ordained whites to be superior and rule over the inferiorly created black people who were predestined to serve and obey their white masters. These precepts, or man-made principles, were directly inspired from biblical mythology. The Bible has always had the greatest impact on race relations in this country because its precepts spelled out the relationship between the divine master and the lowly slave. These precepts of black inferiority were ingrained into the conscience of even the poorest whites who perceived themselves as being superior to blacks. These precepts ultimately found their way into the legal structure of slavery and ultimately enforced an inferior position upon blacks. This is precisely why laws may be changed and amendments may be added over time, but precepts linger. For example, the 13th Amendment did not and could not abolish the precept of black inferiority because the notion of black inferiority was a state of mind that was believed and therefore did not owe its existence to the legal process. What we are experiencing today are the aftershocks of those precepts. There were actually laws written to uphold notions of white supremacy. In fact, in 1667, the Virginia legislature wrote into law the principle or precept that God himself had rendered the blacks inferior because God was on the side of the master. Black inferiority was codified into law. Blacks were perceived as uncivilized, and Christianity became the prescription to help them cope with that divine law. So the Bible not only justified slavery, but set in motion the attitudes that one group is superior or even chosen over another group. Every aspect of superiority came from the precepts of the American slavery jurisprudence. Now, back to the cops. All of these killer cops, and even wannabe cops, feel a sense of superiority over black men. It's hard to imagine freckled-faced Frankie or blue-eyed Billy ever being subjected to these types of abuses. The precept of American slavery jurisprudence are based on attitudes and beliefs that cannot be governed. In other words, you cannot legislate how one group feels about another group. These killer cops are nothing more than slave catchers or big game hunters who see black men as prey and as being different than them, or even as subhuman, which also was a precept of American slavery. Remember, blacks were considered to be only 3/5 of human beings. So it all comes down to perception. How do white men in authority perceive black men?
We're not the same, Carly.
Well, you white and I'm black. When you look at me, you don't see a man. You see a black man. America is a war, and you on the other side. It's how you was raised. Nigger, Negro, black, African American. No matter how you see me as different.
Black men will continue to be hunted and killed like prey until we begin to have honest, politically incorrect discussions about the S and the I word. Blacks were conquered and enslaved because their enslavers subscribed to the precepts within American slavery that they were superior. And when centuries pass and the children of enslavers are still on top, it will appear as though this is just the natural order of things. It may also appear that God does indeed favor whites because whites in general live a more privileged life, not taking into account the hundreds of years of free black labor which put them in such positions. There is, ironically, a passage in the Bible that really has nothing to do with belief or faith, but more so with logic and cause and effect. Matthew 7:18 states that a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Think of America as a tree with roots that run deep with white supremacy. It's a tree with many branches that extend into federal, state, county, and local levels. No matter how history makers attempt to sweeten up the past, America began as a bad tree, so how can it ever bring forth good fruit? This is not going to work. This is not going to affect change either.
I hope God takes care of everybody involved.
God will see us through, no matter what.
I actually prayed this morning when I woke up.
The only way we can begin to amend the precepts is to take a chainsaw to the tree of white supremacy, burn the stump, and then bury the ashes. We must also get a grip on reality and abandon the primitive idea of a God that's going to take care of everything, and a magical God specifically watching over and privately blessing us and bestowing grace and favor into our little universes, despite the millions around the world that are suffering and dying daily. That, my friend, is ego and arrogance at work, which ironically are the same forces that produced the notions of white supremacy. When you believe in supreme beings, it's a seamless transition into believing in supreme human beings. Believing in a supreme being is what gives us our notions of supremacy in the first place. The precepts of yesterday are impacting life today. We live in a world where some groups have been conditioned to see themselves as the center of the human universe from which all other groups revolve. That's got to stop, and maybe the brutality will too. I'm Jeremiah Kamara. Order your copy of Contradiction: A Question of Faith today by visiting jeremiahkamara.com. See you next time on Kamara's Contemplations.